gave her 9-year-old child to a child predator. All I'm gonna ask is, right now, it says she handed her 9-year-old daughter to a predator. Did everything went, went silent?
On the afternoon of Friday, May 16th, 2014, a quiet residential community in Temple Terrace, Florida, became the setting for an act of pure evil. A 9-year-old girl climbed into a car. She was smiling, innocent, and completely relaxed. She expected a fun weekend afternoon with a trusted family friend. She was just a child. She had no idea that the car doors closing around her were the boundaries of a death trap. Felicia Williams never saw her mother again. Less than 60 hours later, on the afternoon of Sunday, May 18th, 2014, the humid air off the Courtney Campbell Causeway in Clearwater, Florida, carried a distinct scent. In the shallow water bay, floating naked among the mangroves, lay the bruised body of a 9-year-old child. Her skull was fractured from a heavy blow. Her small frame bore the clear marks of violent sexual abuse. Deep bruises formed a ring around her neck, where human hands had squeezed the life out of her. The weight of this true crime story lies in the profound betrayal that made it possible. A mother trusted a close friend. That friend trusted a stranger. And that stranger turned a regular afternoon into a living nightmare. He carried a child's body out of an apartment building inside a commercial suitcase. He drove 17 miles across the city just to cast her into the ocean. Today, we are visiting the heartbreaking case of Felicia Williams. This is a journey through a dark web of manufactured stories, digital forensic trails, a compromised witness, and the final judicial verdict that sent a predator to Florida's death row. If you believe in looking closely at the raw facts of these cases and standing up for the memory of children who were failed by the people around them, please take a second to subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications. Tell us where you are watching from and stay with us. We must ensure that Felicia's name is never forgotten. The neighborhood of Temple Terrace seemed peaceful on the surface. It was a place where children played on manicured lawns under the warm Florida sun. But on May 16th, 2014, that sense of safety dissolved into absolute terror. To see how this tragedy unfolded, we have to look back to the very beginning of her life. Felicia Nicole Williams was born on December 9th, 2004. From the moment she arrived, she was the light of her family's world. Her mother and her stepfather, Calvin Holder, cherished her. As she grew, she became a bright, joyful child. Her family affectionately called her Sugar Plum because of her sweet, loving nature. She brought pure energy into her household, but her world was about to cross paths with a dangerous dynamic. It all started because of a decision made by a 23-year-old woman named Ebony Wiley. Wiley was close with Felicia's mother. She was someone the family considered a protector. On that Friday afternoon, Ebony Wiley pulled up to the Williams
mother couldn't her free with her
Sitting
child.
in the vehicle with her was
Free
her
is what they
boyfriend,
gave her child to.
a 35-year-old man named Randall
Correct this, I got
Richie.
what you were looking for.
Richie was an
A mother gave her dream.
He carried a
Her
dark,
child was
hidden
watching her
criminal
child.
past
She
that the
gave her
family knew
child, her
nothing
friend
about.
gave her child
They only saw
to
Ebony.
a child predator.
They trusted her completely. They handed over their beautiful 9-year-old girl for a normal afternoon outing, and they watched the car pull away from the curb.
Why can't you keep
The
everybody?
group stopped briefly at a fast food restaurant to buy Felicia some food. It was a regular routine meant to keep the child comfortable. From there, they drove 10 miles northeast to the Doral Oaks Apartments on Tanglewood Lane in Temple Terrace, where Richie stayed with his mother. They walked up the stairs, entered the apartment, and closed the door. Within minutes of their arrival, a dark reality began to take shape. Around 4:50 p.m., Ebony Wiley decided she wanted to leave the apartment to buy marijuana. Initially, she planned to take Felicia with her in the car,
like that wrong with us.
but Granville Ritchie stepped forward. He spoke smoothly. He convinced Wiley that there was no reason to drag the little girl along on a drug buy. He told her to leave Felicia behind in the room. He promised he would look after her. Ebony Wiley agreed. She turned around, left the residence, and walked out to her vehicle. She left a vulnerable 9-year-old child completely alone with a predator. The clock read exactly 4:50 p.m. A countdown began. The timeline of her survival was now down to just 70 minutes. During this brief hour, Ritchie turned on the child. The raw, cold facts from the medical examiner later laid bare the complete brutality of what happened in those quiet rooms. Ritchie pinned the little girl down. He stripped her of her clothes. He subjected her small body to severe, horrific sexual battery. Felicia did not give up. She fought back with everything she had. The forensic pathologist noted that she sustained deep, extensive, blunt force trauma to her head. There were internal and external injuries across her body from the sheer force of the assault. When her screams threatened to expose what he was doing, Ritchie stopped her voice. He placed his large hands around her neck. He applied a steady, crushing pressure. He squeezed so hard that he fractured the delicate internal bones and cartilaginous structures deep inside her throat. He held her down against the floor until the struggling stopped. He held her until her breathing ended completely. The clock ticked forward. It was now 6 p.m. Ebony Wiley pulled back into the parking lot of the Doral Oaks apartments. She walked up the concrete steps and knocked on the door. When the door opened, the air inside felt heavy and altered. Granville Ritchie stood there. He was completely shirtless. His skin was slick with sweat. He was breathing heavily, pacing back and forth, his eyes wide and panicked. Wiley looked past his naked shoulders. The living room was empty. Felicia was nowhere to be seen. Wiley demanded to know where the little girl was. Ritchie did not hesitate. He had already manufactured a smooth lie. He claimed that while Wiley was away, he had given Felicia some cash because she wanted to walk down to the nearby CVS store to buy some candy. He looked her in the eye and claimed the 9-year-old had simply never returned. Instead of screaming for help, instead of immediately dialing 911, Ebony Wiley let panic dictate her choices. She knew she had left a child alone to participate in an illegal drug deal. Ritchie used that fear against her. He convinced her that they needed to handle this quietly. He told her they should search the neighborhood themselves before involving the police. The two spent the next several hours walking around the complex. They walked through the darkening streets of Temple Terrace, pretending to look for a missing child. They called out her name into the humid night. But it was all a calculated performance. Felicia was already lying lifeless inside that apartment. The sun sank below the horizon, casting pitch-black shadows over the town. Around 10:30 p.m., Granville Ritchie told Wiley it was time to leave. He loaded her into his dark Lexus sedan. He drove her 10 miles back to her home in Tampa. He dropped her off on a quiet street corner, leaving her alone with her mounting terror. Then Ritchie turned his car around. He drove directly back to the Tanglewood Lane apartment. The cover-up was moving into a secondary, terrifying phase. Ritchie walked back into the silent residence. He went to a closet and pulled out a large, dark blue Protégé brand commercial suitcase. He walked over to the small, lifeless form of Felicia Williams. He folded her naked body into the tight, suffocating confines of the luggage. He pulled the zipper shut. He dragged the heavy suitcase across the carpeted floor. He pulled it out onto the rear patio and down the concrete steps toward his car. The weight of the luggage was so heavy that one of the plastic wheels snapped completely off. It left a clean, fractured piece of dark plastic resting in the dirt near the patio. Ritchie ignored it. He shoved the heavy suitcase into the trunk of his Lexus, slammed it shut, and started the engine. It was now the pitch-black morning hours of Saturday, May 17th, 2014. As the entire city slept, a killer was driving through the dark. He was heading toward the coast with a child hidden in his trunk. But as his tires hummed against the asphalt, Richie had no idea that his own cell phone was silently recording his exact location, and a modern digital trail was about to expose every single turn he made in the dark. As dawn broke over Florida on Saturday, May 17, 2014, the Williams family woke up into a living nightmare. Felicia had not returned home. Ebony Wiley was giving strange, empty answers about where the little girl was. Her phone calls were frantic. Her excuses made no sense. Felicia's mother felt a cold panic setting in. She knew her daughter would never stay away this long. Terrified, she called the Temple Terrace Police Department. She reported her 9-year-old daughter missing. When detectives arrived to interview Ebony Wiley, her story fell apart within minutes. She was trembling. Her eyes darted around the room. She gave the officers a completely manufactured lie. She claimed she had taken Felicia to the apartment, and while she was in the bathroom taking a shower, Felicia had simply walked out and vanished. Detectives pressed hard on the timeline. They asked who else was inside that apartment. Wiley lied again. She was desperate to keep Granville Ritchie's name completely out of the police notes. But her story was full of holes. She could not explain the massive time gaps. She could not explain why she waited over 12 hours to call for help. By Saturday afternoon, the police had enough of the lies. They arrested Ebony Wiley. They charged her with providing false information to law enforcement during a capital missing person investigation. They locked her in a county jail cell. The community was left wondering what dark secret she was trying to protect. While Wiley sat behind bars, a massive search grid rolled out across Temple Terrace. Volunteers, K-9 units, and police helicopters scoured the woods. They searched the muddy retention ponds. They checked the dark alleys near Tanglewood Lane. They were looking for a missing child in a bright shirt and shorts. They had no idea they were looking in the wrong county. The true breakthrough came on the afternoon of Sunday, May 18, 2014, at exactly 3:20 p.m. A group of boaters was moving through the water just off the Courtney Campbell Causeway in Clearwater, Florida. The causeway is a long, isolated stretch of highway. It is surrounded by deep water on both sides. It sits roughly 17 miles away from the apartment complex where Felicia was last seen alive. As the boat drifted near a thick line of mangroves, a passenger saw something pale floating in the shallow current. They steered the boat closer. The salt water washed over the form of a young human being. It was a child. She was completely naked, floating face down in the water. The boaters immediately dialed 911. Her family's hope ended right there in the water. Emergency teams and forensic investigators rushed to the causeway. They pulled the small body from the bay. The skin was covered in deep cuts and abrasions. An initial exam revealed heavy trauma to her skull. Deep, dark ligature marks were cut into the skin of her neck. The body was taken directly to the Pinellas County Medical Examiner's office. By Sunday evening, fingerprint matches confirmed the absolute worst. It was Felicia Nicole Williams. When the news reached the Williams home, the neighborhood filled with the sound of screaming and weeping. Her stepfather, Calvin Holder, stood on the porch in absolute shock. He looked at the neighbors and asked a question that would haunt the entire state. Why would anyone want to hurt her? She was just a child. The missing person case was now officially a capital homicide investigation. The state brought in elite forensic teams to sweep the apartment. They brought in digital specialists to pull cell phone data from every tower in the area. They were looking for a monster, and the digital footprint left behind in the dark was about to point directly to a car driving across the bridge in the middle of the night. With the body recovered, detectives immediately brought Ebony Wiley back into the quiet interrogation room. She had just bonded out of jail on Sunday morning from her initial arrest. Faced with the shocking reality that Felicia's body had been pulled from the bay, her manufactured lie about the child vanishing while she was in the shower completely collapsed under the weight of the new evidence. Detectives pressed her hard on the massive time gaps and the true nature of her relationship with Granville Ashanti Ritchie. Under the heavy pressure of the interrogation, Wiley broke down. She admitted to the officers that she had lied to protect her boyfriend because she was terrified of getting into legal trouble over their drug activities. She finally changed her story and gave investigators the missing piece of the puzzle. She confessed that on the afternoon of Friday, May 16, 2014, she had left the Doral Oaks apartment on Tanglewood Lane to buy marijuana, leaving Felicia completely alone in the care of Granville Ritchie. She told detectives that when she returned at 6 p.m., Ritchie was shirtless, dripping with sweat, and pacing the floor like a trapped animal. She detailed how he told her Felicia had gone to a nearby drugstore for candy, and how the two of them had concocted the shower alibi to mislead the police. In her disturbing confession to investigators, she even admitted that she took drugs and had sex with Ritchie later that same night, while the child was missing. This critical admission shifted the entire multi-agency task force squarely onto Granville Ashanti Ritchie. Detectives tracked him down to a residence in St. Petersburg, Florida, where he was staying with another girlfriend, acting as if it were a regular weekend. When investigators brought him into the interrogation room, Ritchie maintained a completely calm, indifferent demeanor. He looked the detectives in the eye and swore under oath that he had never driven anywhere near the Courtney Campbell Causeway that weekend. He believed the water had washed away his sins. But he forgot about the silent tracker inside his pocket. State electronic forensic experts obtained a legal warrant for Ritchie's mobile phone records, pulling the historical cell site location data that would place him at the dump site in the dead of night. The data did not lie. It provided a cold, unalterable, minute-by-minute map of his actual movements through the dark. At 11 p.m. on Friday night, Ritchie's phone pinged a tower directly adjacent to the Tanglewood Lane apartment complex. This proved he was still at the scene of the murder long after he claimed he had left. Then, at 1 a.m. on Saturday morning, the cell signal began to move. The digital footprint showed him traveling west, moving out of Temple Terrace and cutting straight across the highways of Hillsborough County. Between 1:45 a.m. and 2:30 a.m., his phone connected to a single cellular tower located directly on the isolated Courtney Campbell Causeway. The ping showed his phone remained completely stationary for 45 intense minutes. He was standing at the exact stretch of mangrove-lined shoreline where the boaters would later find Felicia floating face down. Finally, at 3 a.m., the signal moved south, tracking his arrival at the house in St. Petersburg. The digital trail placed him directly at the dump site in the dead of night. Armed with this data, forensic teams executed a search warrant on Ritchie's property and his dark Lexus sedan. They were looking for trace evidence. What they found inside the car was devastating. Crime scene technicians lifted the heavy hood of the vehicle. They examined the front undercarriage and the plastic housing around the headlights. Wedged deep inside the plastic gaps of the front headlight assembly were fragments of unique, rare shoreline plant material. The state brought in an environmental botanist to analyze the green fragments. The expert confirmed that the vegetation did not belong to any inland plants found in Temple Terrace or the city of Tampa. They were specific, salt-tolerant shoreline leaves that grew exclusively along the water edges of the Courtney Campbell Causeway. Next, investigators scraped the carpet of the driver's side floorboard. They recovered soil and sand samples. The mineral composition perfectly matched the dirt paths leading down to the water at the exact spot where the body was cast away. The search then shifted right back to the apartment on Tanglewood Lane. Technicians used high-intensity forensic lights across the rear patio and the carpeted living room. They found clear indentations on the floorboards. The marks showed where a heavy, wheeled object had been dragged under significant weight. And there, resting in the soil just off the edge of the patio, they found a small piece of dark plastic. It was a broken structural wheel support from a Protege brand commercial suitcase. Inside the home, they recovered a matching broken zipper pull that had been violently torn away from the fabric. The state now had the complete timeline. They had the digital tower pings placing the suspect at the ocean. They had the physical earth from the shoreline embedded deep inside his car. In August 2014, the grand jury issued a formal indictment. Granville Ashanti Ritchie was officially arrested and locked away. He was charged with first-degree capital murder, capital sexual battery, and aggravated child abuse. The state made it very clear they would be seeking the death penalty. But as Ritchie sat in his concrete cell waiting for trial, the public domain was about to learn about an even more disturbing piece of evidence. A seconds-long audio recording that would completely shatter any lingering doubts about what happened during those 70 minutes of absolute silence. It took 5 long, agonizing years for the state of Florida to bring Granville Ashanti Ritchie to trial. Legal delays, defense motions, and psychological evaluations dragged the process out. For 2,310 days, Felicia's mother sat in the courtroom gallery. She sat there completely broken, waiting for the legal system to address the loss of her little girl. The trial finally opened in September 2019. The venue was the Hillsborough County Circuit Court, presided over by Judge Michelle Cisco. The courtroom air was thick and suffocating. The benches were packed with media, community members, and a grieving family dressed in deep black. The prosecution built their entire case around a single, devastating reality: ultimate betrayal. They laid out the physical trail of evidence for the jury. They displayed the broken suitcase wheels. They showed the shoreline soil. They mapped out the midnight cell tower pings. But the true emotional peak of the trial arrived when the state called its star witness to the stand. Ebony Wiley walked up to the witness box. Wiley had reached a formal plea agreement with the state. In exchange for her testimony, she faced charges for her initial interference and the false statements she gave to the police. But now she was legally required to tell the raw, unvarnished truth about what happened inside that apartment. As she took the stand, she was visibly trembling. Her voice shook with a heavy, unstable emotion. She completely refused to look across the room at Granville Ritchie. Ritchie sat at the defense table, his face entirely blank and indifferent. Under direct examination, Wiley took the jury back to the afternoon of Friday, May 16th, 2014. She admitted that she was the one who drove Felicia away from her safe family home. She wept openly as she recalled the exact moment Ritchie looked her in the eye on the apartment sofa. She described how he smoothly convinced her to leave the 9-year-old child behind while she went down the street to buy drugs. "I trusted him," she whispered into the silent courtroom. "I never thought he would hurt her." She described her return to the apartment at 6 p.m. She told the jury how she found Ritchie completely shirtless, dripping with sweat, and pacing the floor like a trapped animal. She detailed the lie he told about the CVS candy run. She admitted that her own terror of getting into legal trouble stopped her from picking up the phone and calling 911 immediately. She let the clock run out while Felicia lay lifeless just feet away. The defense attorneys launched a brutal cross-examination. They hammered Wiley on her extensive history of deception. They pointed out that she had given 3 completely different versions of events to investigators during the first 48 hours of the missing person case. They argued to the jury that Wiley was simply changing her story to escape a massive prison sentence. They claimed she was pinning her own negligence on Ritchie to save herself. But the prosecution stood firm. They showed that Wiley's final weeping testimony aligned perfectly with the objective, cold digital facts. Her timeline of when she left and returned matched the exact data logs of the wireless towers. Her description of Ritchie's frantic, sweating state fit the timeline of a killer trying to hide a body before the sun came up. The state then called the medical examiner to the stand. The room went completely cold as graphic, technical details from the autopsy filled the air. The raw medical facts were unalterable. Felicia had been subjected to severe physical trauma before her airway was crushed. She did not pass away quickly. She died a slow, painful death in that room while the person who was supposed to protect her was driving around looking for drugs. On September 25th, 2019, after a grueling 2-week trial, the case was officially handed over to the jury. The 12 citizens walked into the deliberation room. It took them just 4 hours to reach a decision. They walked back into the courtroom, looked at the defendant, and delivered a unanimous verdict. Guilty on all counts of first-degree capital murder, capital sexual battery, and aggravated child abuse. The conviction was secured, but the absolute climax of this legal battle was still to come. The jury was about to re-enter that room to decide if Granville Ritchie would pay for the life of Sugar Plum with his very own execution. On Friday, September 27, 2019, the 12 members of the jury walked back into the Hillsborough County courtroom. Their task was heavy. In the state of Florida, a death sentence requires an absolute, unanimous vote from every single juror. If even one person hesitated, the killer would escape the ultimate penalty. The defense attorneys pleaded for mercy. They spoke about Ritchie's childhood in Kingston, Jamaica. They argued that spending the rest of his natural life inside a maximum security cage was punishment enough. But the prosecution stood before the jury box and asked them to look closely at the sheer depravity of the crime scene. They laid out the facts one last time. They spoke of the age of the victim, the violent sexual battery, and the cold, calculated manner in which he packed a 9-year-old child into a dark suitcase and threw her into the saltwater bay. The prosecutor argued that these brutal details demanded the ultimate sentence available under the law. The jury locked themselves away. They deliberated in secret. When the door finally opened and they filed back into the room, their decision was absolute. The vote was 12-0, a unanimous recommendation for the death penalty. Due to a series of legal delays and structural court shutdowns throughout 2020, the formal final sentencing phase was pushed back to the morning of Friday, September 11th, 2020. On that day, Circuit Judge Michelle Cisco ordered Granville Ashanti Ritchie to stand up and face the bench. But before the judge pronounced the sentence, Felicia Demerson, the grieving mother of Sugar Plum, stepped up to the wooden podium. She was dressed completely in black. Her voice shook with a profound, breaking sorrow. She turned her body and looked directly into the face of Granville Ritchie. Ritchie remained entirely motionless, his hands resting at his sides.
I've waited 2,310 days for this day to come. I cannot ask for his fate. And that would be for him to be hung, for him to feel what I gotta feel.
Judge Michelle Cisco then turned her focus to the defendant. She made it clear that in all her decades on the legal bench, she had rarely witnessed an act of such calculated, pure cruelty against an innocent child. She stated that the raw evidence proved Felicia had suffered a horrendous, physically painful, and psychologically torturous death. The judge's final words cut through the heavy silence of the room.
My heart breaks for you as a mother. Absolutely breaks for you as a mother.
There will be no corporeal redemption for you, your physical being, your person. You will remain incarcerated until the date of your death is scheduled to occur. Pursuant to the laws of the state of Florida, you are hereby sentenced to death. Ritchie was led out of the courtroom doors in heavy iron chains. He was transported directly to the death row housing unit at the Union Correctional Institution in Rayford, Florida. His legal defense team filed an immediate appeal. They claimed there was prosecutorial misconduct during the trial and challenged the circumstantial nature of the digital cellular data. However, in June 2022, the Florida Supreme Court reviewed every single page of the trial records. They officially issued an opinion rejecting his claims, upholding both the capital conviction and the death sentence. He remains on death row to this day. The heartbreaking murder of Felicia Williams stands as a dark, permanent warning. It shows how quickly innocence can be destroyed when the sacred boundaries of trust are shattered by a predator. A 9-year-old girl's entire future was stolen because the adults who were supposed to look out for her failed to keep her safe, leaving a family to carry an unbearable, lifelong grief. What do you think about the legal choices made by Ebony Wiley on that hot Friday afternoon? Should our justice system place a heavier criminal penalty on individuals who leave vulnerable children alone in the care of practical strangers?
Yep.
Let's talk about the digital tracking evidence and the ethics of child safety in the comments section below. If you want to continue looking deeply into these criminal investigations, with a strict focus on historical facts and narrative truth, please take a second to like this video, share it with others in the true crime community, and subscribe to stand with us. May Felicia Sugarplum Williams finally rest in eternal, beautiful peace.